My name is Nora, and I was 31 the evening my mother-in-law stood in a ballroom dripping in imported Austrian chandeliers, gestured toward me with a champagne flute, and introduced me to the city's mayor as her son's little charity case. She said it with a smile, of course. Beatrice Kensington never delivered an insult without wrapping it in a layer of plausible deniability. She patted my arm, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light, and loudly whispered to the small circle of local politicians that it was so important for families of our standing to give back, even if that meant accepting a daughter-in-law from a humble, stagnant background. My husband Julian stood right next to her. He didn't defend me. He just looked at his Italian leather loafers, took a sip of his scotch, and nervously changed the subject to the upcoming golf tournament. I didn't flush with embarrassment. I didn't run to the restroom in tears. I simply took a sip of my sparkling water, smiled a calm, perfectly blank smile, and let them enjoy their fabricated superiority for exactly 1 more hour. Because what Beatrice didn't know, what none of the elite socialites in that massive ballroom knew, was that the prestigious charity they were all there to celebrate was completely bankrupt. And the anonymous, multi-million-dollar angel benefactor who had stepped in to save Beatrice's foundation from total insolvency wasn't a foreign oil tycoon or a reclusive hedge fund manager. It was the little charity case she was currently laughing at. Welcome back to Whispered Drama Stories, the channel where we explore the incredible things that happen when ordinary women stop screaming for a seat at the table and simply buy the building instead. If you love stories about quiet observation, ironclad financial boundaries, and the moment a narcissist realizes they are standing on a trap door, you are in the exact right place. Drop a comment below to let me know you're listening, and be sure to subscribe so the next story finds you. To understand the sheer magnitude of the trap Beatrice Kensington was blindly walking into that night, you have to understand the anatomy of a coward and the anatomy of a fraud. The coward was my husband, Julian. When I met Julian 3 years earlier, he seemed like the perfect antidote to my chaotic, hyper-focused life. I was a software developer who had spent her entire 20s living in a tiny apartment, eating takeout, and writing thousands of lines of code for a cybersecurity logistics platform I had built from scratch. Julian was charming, effortlessly handsome, and possessed the kind of relaxed confidence that only comes from knowing your family's trust fund will catch you if you fall. He worked in acquisitions for his father's real estate firm, which mostly meant he attended 3-hour lunches and signed documents his paralegals prepared. I didn't tell Julian about the true scale of my company when we were dating. It wasn't a malicious lie of omission, it was a self-preservation tactic. I had grown up in the foster care system. I knew what it felt like to be valued only for what I could provide. When my platform started gaining serious traction in the tech sector, attracting buyout offers from Silicon Valley giants, I kept my lifestyle aggressively normal. I drove a 5-year-old Honda. I wore plain, sensible clothes. I told Julian I was a freelance data analyst who worked from home. I wanted to know that he loved me for me, not for a balance sheet. And for a while I genuinely believed he did. He seemed to love my quiet nature. He loved that I didn't care about designer labels or country club politics. But I eventually realized that Julian didn't love my modesty because it was refreshing. He loved it because it made him feel superior. Julian was a man who desperately needed to be the most important person in the room, and marrying a woman he perceived as a low-level, struggling freelancer made him feel like a benevolent king. This dynamic was heavily enforced by his mother, Beatrice. Beatrice Kensington was a woman whose entire identity was entirely dependent on her zip code and her last name. She was the matriarch of a family that had been wealthy for 3 generations, which meant she possessed a deep, primal fear of anyone she considered new money, let alone no money. From the moment Julian introduced me to her, she made it her personal mission to remind me of my place. "You have such a simple face, Nora," she told me at our first dinner, staring at my lack of makeup. "It's very quaint." Julian has always had a soft spot for rescues. When Julian proposed to me, Beatrice nearly had a stroke. She demanded we sign an ironclad prenuptial agreement, drafted by her family's terrifying team of corporate lawyers. The prenup was brutal. It stated that in the event of a divorce, I would walk away with absolutely nothing from the Kensington estate. No alimony, and no claim to Julian's future inheritances. Julian brought the 50-page document to my apartment, looking deeply apologetic but fundamentally unwilling to push back against his mother. "It's just a formality, Nora," he promised, rubbing the back of his neck. "My mother is just paranoid about the family legacy. It doesn't mean anything to us." I read the document. I didn't cry and I didn't argue. I simply took a pen and signed my name on the dotted line, waiving my right to every single penny of Kensington money. Beatrice thought I signed it because I was a desperate, subservient girl who was just grateful to marry into the aristocracy. She had no idea that I signed it because, exactly 6 months prior to Julian's proposal, my cybersecurity platform had been quietly acquired by a multinational tech conglomerate. I hadn't updated my LinkedIn. I hadn't bought a mansion. But my personal net worth was sitting securely north of $40 million, parked in a series of blind trusts and highly diversified index funds managed by a fiduciary who answered only to me. By signing Beatrice's aggressive prenuptial agreement, I hadn't protected Julian's money from me. I had legally, irreversibly protected my $40 million from Julian. We got married in a modest ceremony that Beatrice complained about loudly. We moved into a starter home that Julian's trust fund paid the down payment on. I continued to work from my home office, telling Julian I was doing contract coding for mid-level marketing firms, while in reality, I was managing my investment portfolio and advising tech startups as a silent board member. For the first year of our marriage, I tolerated Beatrice's passive-aggressive cruelty because I thought that was simply the price of admission for a family. But the turning point, the moment I transitioned from a passive observer to an active auditor, happened because of her charity. Beatrice was the founder and president of the Kensington Foundation for At-Risk Youth. It was her crown jewel. She spent her days organizing luncheons, ordering floral centerpieces, and giving self-aggrandizing interviews to local lifestyle magazines about her philanthropic sacrifices. One evening, Beatrice came over to our house for dinner. She spent the entire meal complaining about the local government cutting public funding for her charity. "The city simply doesn't appreciate what I do," Beatrice sighed, taking a delicate sip of her wine. "We are operating on a razor-thin margin this quarter. I am exhausting myself trying to keep this foundation afloat, and these ungrateful bureaucrats want to audit my overhead. It's insulting. Julian, darling, you really must speak to your father about releasing more funds from the family trust to cover our operating costs." "I'll talk to him, Mom," Julian said dutifully, slicing his chicken. Beatrice turned her sharp, calculating eyes to me. "It's a shame you don't have a background in fundraising, Nora, or really, a background in anything useful. The foundation could use cheap administrative help, but I suppose data entry doesn't exactly prepare you for the complexities of high-level philanthropy." "I suppose not," I said quietly. "But my brain is built on data. It is built on finding anomalies in code, tracing variables, and recognizing patterns." And Beatrice's complaints about razor-thin margins and auditing overhead triggered an immediate red flag. The Kensingtons were wealthy, and the foundation hosted 3 massive million-dollar galas every single year. Where was the money going? The next morning, while Julian was at the office, I brewed a pot of black coffee, sat down at my custom-built multi-monitor workstation, and decided to do a little data entry of my own. Charities in the United States are required by law to file a Form 990A with the IRS, detailing their revenues, expenses, and executive compensation. These forms are publicly available if you know which databases to query. It took me less than 10 minutes to pull the last 5 years of tax returns for the Kensington Foundation for At-Risk Youth. I spent the next 6 hours doing a deep forensic analysis of Beatrice's crowning achievement. The numbers were staggering and they were sickening. The foundation was pulling in roughly $4 million a year in donations from the city's elite. But according to the tax filings, less than 12% of that money was actually reaching any at-risk youth programs, community centers, or scholarship funds. The remaining 88% was categorized as administrative overhead and fundraising costs. I drilled down into the line items. Beatrice was paying herself an annual executive director salary of $350,000. She was expensing first-class flights to charity conferences in Paris and Milan. The foundation was leasing a fleet of luxury SUVs for its executive board, which consisted entirely of her closest friends. And worst of all, the massive, extravagant galas she threw weren't raising money. They were operating at a catastrophic loss. She was spending $1 million on champagne, caviar, and celebrity entertainment just to raise $500,000 in donations. The Kensington Foundation wasn't a charity. It was a taxpayer-subsidized social club designed to fund Beatrice's elite lifestyle and stroke her massive ego. And, according to the most recent quarterly filings I managed to scrape, the foundation was officially out of money. The reckless spending had caught up with them. They were staring down a massive deficit, owing hundreds of thousands of dollars to private vendors, caterers, and venues. If they didn't secure a massive, immediate injection of capital, the foundation would be forced into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, exposing Beatrice's financial mismanagement to the entire city. I sat back in my desk chair, staring at the glowing monitors. I could have printed the tax returns, slammed them on Julian's desk, and demanded he confront his mother. But I knew Julian. He would make an excuse for her. He would tell me I was misinterpreting the data because I didn't understand high-level philanthropy. If I wanted to expose Beatrice, I couldn't just accuse her. I had to become the very thing she worshipped. I had to become the money. I picked up my phone and called my primary wealth manager at the private banking firm that handled my $40 million. "David," I said when he answered, "I need to set up an anonymous, blind trust philanthropic LLC, completely untraceable to my name. I want it routed through a registered agent in Delaware, and I want you to act as the sole legal point of contact." "Of course, Nora," David said smoothly. "What's the objective of the entity?" "We are going to make a pledge," I said, a cold, analytical calm settling over me. "I want you to contact the board of directors for the Kensington Foundation for At-Risk Youth. Inform them that an anonymous angel benefactor is aware of their current financial distress. Tell them the benefactor is prepared to pledge $5 million to save the charity." David was silent for a moment. He had seen my financial portfolio, and he knew I didn't throw money away lightly. $5 million is a substantial rescue package, Nora. Do you want to attach stipulations? "Yes," I said. "Attach brutal stipulations. The money is not to be dispersed immediately. It will be released in a series of highly restricted tranches. The first tranche of $50,000 will be released immediately to cover their most urgent vendor debts, just to prove we are real. The remaining $4.95 million will be held in escrow, contingent upon a full, independent forensic audit of the Foundation's last 5 years of administrative spending. Tell them the benefactor demands a complete restructuring of the executive board before the funds are fully released." "Beatrice Kensington is the president," David noted, reading the file. "She's not going to take kindly to an anonymous donor demanding her financial records. She won't have a choice," I replied softly. "She's bankrupt. If she rejects the pledge, the charity folds next month and she is publicly humiliated. She'll take the deal. She will convince herself that once the money is in her account, she can charm the anonymous donor into ignoring the audit. She operates on arrogance. We are going to weaponize that." It took 2 weeks for the trap to be set. David, acting as the terrifyingly professional proxy for my blind trust, which we named the Vanguard Horizon Initiative, approached the Kensington Foundation's board of directors. Behind Beatrice's back, the panicked, desperate board enthusiastically accepted the terms. They signed a legally binding letter of intent. The initial $50,000 was wired to keep the lights on, and the promise of $5 million was legally escrowed, waiting for the upcoming gala. Beatrice, predictably, was ecstatic. She had no idea she was signing her own professional death warrant. She believed she had hooked a billionaire whale who was simply too busy to involve themselves in the day-to-day operations. She immediately began planning the annual Kensington Charity Gala, viewing it as a victory lap. She told everyone in her social circle that a mysterious foreign entity had pledged $5 million because they were so deeply moved by her personal dedication to the cause. Which brings us to the week of the gala. Julian came into my home office on a Tuesday evening, looking deeply stressed. He was wearing his tailored suit, holding a glossy, gold-embossed invitation. "Nora," he sighed, leaning against the doorframe, "my mother's annual gala is this Saturday. It's a massive deal this year. They secured some massive anonymous donor who is apparently saving the whole foundation. Mom is being honored. We have to be there." I didn't turn away from my monitors. "Okay. What's the dress code?" Julian hesitated. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the universal body language of a coward preparing to deliver an insult. "It's black tie. But listen, Mom called me today. She's really stressed about the optics of the event. All the major donors will be there. The press, the mayor. She asked if you could, well, try to blend in. She said you have a tendency to wear things that look a little too off the rack, and she doesn't want the major donors getting the wrong impression about the family's standing." I stopped typing. I slowly swiveled my chair to face my husband. "Your mother wants me to look invisible so I don't embarrass her in front of a donor," I clarified, my voice dangerously flat. Julian rubbed the back of his neck, looking anywhere but my eyes. "Don't put words in her mouth, Nora. It's just a high-pressure night. She's essentially auditioning for $5 million. Just wear something plain. Black. Don't draw attention to yourself. I'll buy you a nice dress from the department store tomorrow, okay?" He was offering to buy me a department store dress to appease his mother's vanity, completely unaware that my net worth could purchase the department store, the building it sat in, and the land underneath it. "You don't need to buy me a dress, Julian," I said softly, turning back to my screens. "I already have exactly what I need for Saturday night." He looked relieved, completely oblivious to the iceberg he was steering his marriage into. "Great. Thanks for being so understanding, Nora. You're always so easy." He left the room. I sat in the silence of my office, pulled up the encrypted portal for the Vanguard Horizon Initiative, and drafted an email to David. "David, the audit of the Kensington Foundation's overhead is complete, correct?" His reply came 2 minutes later. "Yes, it's catastrophic. Blatant misappropriation of funds, self-dealing, and fraudulent expense reporting. The board is legally exposed. The Attorney General would have a field day with this." I smiled, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. "Perfect. Print the executive summary on high-quality legal paper. Put it in a sealed black envelope. I will need it delivered to me by courier on Saturday morning. It's time for the angel benefactor to make an appearance." Saturday evening arrived with a suffocating, humid heat. The gala was being held at the Grand Plaza Hotel, the most exclusive, astronomically expensive venue in the city. I didn't wear a cheap, off-the-rack dress, but I didn't wear a flashy designer gown either. I wore a tailored, perfectly fitted charcoal suit. It was severe, authoritative, and completely devoid of the feminine subservience Beatrice expected from me. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, tight knot and wore absolutely zero jewelry. I didn't look like a charity case. I looked like an executioner. Julian frowned when I walked into the living room, but he was too distracted by his own tie to argue. We got into his leased BMW and drove to the hotel in near silence. The ballroom was a masterpiece of financial hypocrisy. There were thousands of white roses cascading from the ceiling, a 20-piece orchestra playing classical arrangements, and waiters passing trays of beluga caviar. All of it paid for on credit, funded by the delusion that my money was about to bail them out. The moment we walked in, Beatrice swooped down on us like a hawk spotting a field mouse. She was wearing a custom-made crimson gown and a diamond necklace that cost more than the average American home. "Julian, darling," she cooed, kissing both his cheeks before her eyes slid to me, immediately narrowing with distaste at my charcoal suit. "Nora, you look aggressively corporate. Are you planning to audit the coat check?" "Just enjoying the atmosphere, Beatrice," I said, my voice smooth and unbothered. She rolled her eyes and grabbed Julian's arm. "Come along, Julian. I need you to mingle with the city council members. Nora, try to find a quiet table near the back. Don't hover near the press photographers, please." That was when she dragged Julian over to the mayor, handed him a drink, and introduced me as her little charity case. She did it loudly, ensuring the people who mattered heard her establish the social hierarchy. Julian looked at the floor. The mayor offered me a pitying, tight smile. I excused myself from the circle, walked toward the back of the room, and found a quiet shadow near the massive audiovisual control booth. I reached into the inside pocket of my charcoal blazer and felt the crisp, heavy weight of the sealed black envelope David had couriered to me that morning. I wasn't hiding. I was waiting. Because I knew the exact schedule of the evening. I knew that at 9 p.m. the orchestra would stop playing. I knew that the chairman of the foundation's board, a nervous, sweating man named Richard, would take the stage to formally announce the $5 million pledge from the Vanguard Horizon Initiative. And I knew that I was going to walk onto that stage, open the black envelope, and burn Beatrice Kensington's entire world to the ground. The hour between 8 and 9 o'clock was a masterclass in watching a room full of elite socialites pretend to care about the less fortunate, while entirely ignoring the woman they deemed too poor to be among them. I stood in the shadows near the audiovisual booth, sipping sparkling water, and observed the ecosystem of the Kensington Charity Gala. Beatrice was in her element, a queen holding court. She glided from table to table in her crimson gown, kissing cheeks and accepting unearned praise for her tireless dedication to the community. Julian trailed a few steps behind her like a well-dressed lapdog, nodding when she paused, laughing when she made a joke. He didn't look for me once. He was exactly where he wanted to be, basking in the reflected glow of his mother's fabricated importance. At 8:45 p.m., the catering staff began clearing the dessert plates. The 20-piece orchestra played a final sweeping crescendo and then gracefully lowered their instruments. The ambient lighting in the ballroom dimmed, and a single dramatic spotlight illuminated the grand stage at the front of the room. A hush fell over the crowd. The chairman of the foundation's board, a sweating, nervous man named Richard, who owned a local chain of luxury car dealerships, stepped up to the crystal podium. He tapped the microphone, a sound that echoed sharply across the cavernous room. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and esteemed donors," Richard began, his voice trembling slightly with manufactured emotion. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate the life-changing work of the Kensington Foundation for At-Risk Youth, and more importantly, to celebrate the visionary woman who makes it all possible, our founder and president, Beatrice Kensington." The ballroom erupted into polite, synchronized applause. Beatrice, seated at the center table right in front of the stage, pressed a hand to her chest, feigning humble surprise. She stood up, turning to wave at the crowd, soaking in the adoration like dry earth soaking up rain. For 5 years, Beatrice has sacrificed her time, her energy, and her heart for this city. Richard continued, completely ignoring the fact that what she had actually sacrificed was taxpayer-subsidized donor money to pay for her own first-class flights. But tonight is not just a celebration of the past. It is a bold step into the future. Richard paused, leaning closer to the microphone. The crowd leaned in with him. "As many of you know, the philanthropic landscape has been challenging lately," he said, using the polite corporate euphemism for, "we are completely broke." But true dedication attracts true generosity. Tonight, I am deeply honored to announce that the Kensington Foundation has secured an unprecedented pledge. An anonymous philanthropic trust, known as the Vanguard Horizon Initiative, has pledged a staggering $5 million to ensure our mission continues for decades to come. The applause wasn't polite this time. It was a roar. $5 million is a massive sum even in high society circles. Photographers from local society magazines surged forward, their camera flashes turning the front of the room into a strobe light. Beatrice was practically vibrating with triumph. She looked at the mayor, who was clapping enthusiastically, and then she looked at Julian, her eyes screaming, "Look at what I did. Look at how important I am. We respect the privacy of our angel benefactor." Richard boomed over the applause, holding up a hand to quiet the room. "They prefer to let their generosity speak for itself. However, we received a communication from their legal counsel just this afternoon. We were informed that a representative of the Vanguard Horizon Initiative is actually in the room with us tonight." The crowd gasped. A ripple of excited, frantic whispering swept through the ballroom as hundreds of wealthy elites began looking around, trying to spot the hidden billionaire among them. Beatrice's head snapped up. She looked thrilled, her eyes scanning the VIP tables, preparing to charm whoever was about to step forward. Before I take that walk to the stage, if you've ever had to sit silently while a toxic narcissist took credit for a completely fabricated reality, hit the subscribe button. Because the reality check I'm about to deliver is the reason I built this entire trap. I stepped out of the shadows. I didn't rush. I walked at a perfectly measured, deliberate pace down the center aisle of the ballroom. My charcoal suit stood out against the sea of sparkling gowns and tuxedos like a storm cloud moving across a clear sky. The click, click, click of my heels against the polished marble floor seemed to echo in the sudden, confused silence that parted the crowd. People stared. They didn't recognize me as a billionaire. They recognized me as Beatrice's little charity case, the aggressively corporate daughter-in-law who was supposed to be hiding in the back. Julian saw me first. He was standing near his mother's table, and his face instantly contorted into a mask of pure, frantic embarrassment. He took a step toward the aisle, reaching out to intercept me. "Nora, what are you doing?" he hissed, his voice a desperate, panicked whisper. "You're walking into the spotlight. Go back to the table. You're embarrassing Mom." I didn't stop. I didn't even look at him. I stepped smoothly around his outstretched hand, completely ignoring his existence, and kept my eyes fixed on the crystal podium. Beatrice realized what was happening a second later. Her triumphant smile froze, fracturing into a look of absolute, venomous outrage. She stood up from her chair, her custom crimson gown rustling violently. "Nora!" Beatrice barked, no longer caring who heard her. "Get away from the stage! Security! Where is the event staff? Someone remove her!" But the security guards lining the walls didn't move. Why would they? I wasn't screaming. I wasn't holding a weapon. I was just a woman, in a perfectly tailored suit walking calmly toward a microphone. I reached the front of the room, bypassed the stunned chairman, and climbed the 3 short steps onto the stage. Richard backed away from the podium as if I were radioactive. I stepped up to the microphone, adjusted it downward by half an inch, and looked out over a sea of the most powerful people in the city. The silence was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that massive chandelier-lit room. I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer and withdrew the crisp, black envelope. I laid it gently on the crystal podium. "Good evening," I said. My voice was calm, resonant, and completely devoid of the nervous tremor Beatrice had spent the last 3 years trying to beat into me. "For those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Nora Kensington, Julian's wife." I paused, letting the name hang in the air. "But to the board of directors standing behind me," I continued, "and to the legal counsel who drafted the $5 million letter of intent, I am known as the sole director and exclusive funding source of the Vanguard Horizon Initiative." The silence in the room didn't just deepen, it calcified. Beatrice's jaw physically dropped. All the color drained from her face, leaving her looking hollow and terrified under the harsh stage lighting. Julian, standing by the front table, looked as though someone had just struck him in the back of the head with a mallet. He blinked rapidly, his brain completely unable to process the combination of words I had just spoken. "That's a lie!" Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking, the shrill sound of a narcissist whose reality is being fundamentally violated. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "She's a liar! She's a low-level data entry clerk. Richard, get her off the stage. She's having a psychotic break." "It isn't a lie, Beatrice," I said smoothly, turning my gaze directly to her. "And Richard knows it isn't, because Richard signed the escrow agreement." I looked at the chairman, who was currently sweating profusely and looking like he wanted to crawl under the stage. "Isn't that right, Richard? The initial $50,000 wire transfer that kept your venue vendors from locking you out of this hotel today came from an account managed by my private wealth fiduciary, David. I'm sure you recognize the name." Richard swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He nodded, a tiny, jerky motion. The crowd erupted into a chaotic murmur. Flashbulbs started firing again, this time directed at me, and then at the horrified face of Beatrice Kensington. I tapped the microphone once to bring the room back to order. As Richard noted, I continued calmly, the Vanguard Horizon Initiative did indeed pledge $5 million to the Kensington Foundation. However, as the board is well aware, the final disbursement of those funds was entirely legally contingent upon a single stipulation: an independent, third-party forensic audit of the Foundation's administrative spending over the last 5 years. I picked up the black envelope. I unsealed it with a single, sharp motion. I received the executive summary of that audit this morning, I told the captivated audience, and I feel it is my duty as a supposed benefactor to share the findings with the generous people in this room who have been writing checks to this organization for half a decade. Nora, stop! Julian yelled, finally finding his voice. He took a step toward the stage, his face flushed with panic. You don't know what you're doing. You're ruining my mother. No, Julian. I corrected him into the microphone. Your mother ruined herself. I'm just reading the receipts. I pulled the heavy legal weight paper from the envelope and smoothed it out on the podium. According to the forensic audit, I read, my voice ringing out clearly. In the last fiscal year, the Kensington Foundation for At-Risk Youth raised $4.2 million. Of that total, exactly $480,000, or roughly 11%, was dispersed to actual charitable programs. A collective gasp echoed from the back of the room. The mayor, sitting at the VIP table, slowly set his champagne flute down, his expression turning to stone. The remaining 89%, I continued, was consumed entirely by administrative overhead. This includes Beatrice Kensington's $350,000 executive salary. It includes $120,000 in first-class international airfare to destinations with no charitable ties. It includes a fleet of leased Range Rovers for the executive board. And, perhaps most egregiously, it includes the cost of tonight's gala, which, before my initial $50,000 rescue wire, was operating at a catastrophic $600,000 deficit. I lowered the paper and looked directly at Beatrice. She looked like a woman who had just been thrown out of an airplane without a parachute. You aren't running a charity, Beatrice, I said, my voice echoing in the dead-silent room. You are running a vanity project designed to subsidize your luxury lifestyle using donor money. You are completely, mathematically insolvent. You are bankrupt. Shut up, Beatrice shrieked. It wasn't a word, it was an animalistic sound of pure, unadulterated panic. She abandoned all pretense of high society, hiking up her expensive crimson gown and storming toward the stage. You ungrateful little rat, I took you in. I let Julian marry you. You are nothing. You are a stagnant little nobody, and you forged these numbers to destroy me because you're jealous. She was raving. She was screaming in front of the mayor, the city council, and the most prominent reporters in the state. I didn't match her anger. I didn't raise my voice. The strongest position in any room isn't the one screaming the loudest. It's the one that doesn't need to scream at all. I didn't forge anything, Beatrice, I said calmly. The audit was conducted by one of the top forensic accounting firms in the country. And because the foundation fundamentally failed that audit by engaging in gross misappropriation of funds, the Vanguard Horizon Initiative is formally invoking the breach clause of our letter of intent. I looked out at the silent, horrified crowd. The remaining $4.95 million pledge is hereby legally revoked, I announced. The funds are returning to my trust. The Kensington Foundation is on its own. The sheer gravity of the statement landed on the room like an anvil. The foundation was dead. It was worse than dead. It was publicly exposed as a fraud, with massive debts and zero capital to pay them. The Attorney General's office would be launching a full-scale investigation by Monday morning. Julian, finally realizing that the foundation was ruined and his family's social standing was annihilated, rushed up the stage stairs. He grabbed my arm, gripping it hard enough to bruise. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Julian hissed, his eyes wild with betrayal and fear. He wasn't looking at a freelance data analyst anymore. He was looking at a predator he hadn't known was in the cage with him. "How do you have $5 million? You're a freelancer. You drive a Honda. You signed a prenup." I looked down at his hand gripping my blazer. Then I looked into his eyes. I saw exactly what he was. A coward who was furious that his favorite toy had suddenly grown teeth. I signed the prenup to protect my $40 million from you, Julian, I said, my voice perfectly level, ensuring the microphone picked up every single syllable. Julian physically recoiled, letting go of my arm as if the fabric of my suit had suddenly caught fire. 40 million? He stammered, the blood draining from his face, leaving him pale and sick-looking under the stage lights. I sold my cybersecurity company 6 months before you proposed, I told my husband, watching the realization shatter his entire ego. I didn't tell you because I wanted to see if you actually loved me, or if you just loved having a wife you could look down on. You spent our entire marriage treating me like an inferior accessory while you lived off your mother's fabricated allowance. You aren't acquisitions, Julian. You're a dependent. I stepped away from the podium. I didn't need the microphone anymore. The work was done. We're getting a divorce, I told him quietly, just between the two of us. And, per the ironclad prenuptial agreement your mother's terrifying corporate lawyers drafted to ensure I got nothing, you will walk away with exactly what you brought to this marriage. Nothing. The silence that followed my announcement was not the polite, manufactured quiet of a high society gala. It was the frantic, breathless silence of a room full of people realizing they had just witnessed a social execution. I turned my back on Julian, descended the 3 stairs from the stage, and began walking back down the center aisle. Behind me, the chaos finally broke. It started with the press. The reporters who had been invited to cover Beatrice's crowning achievement suddenly realized they had just been handed the scandal of the decade. Flashbulbs erupted like a strobe light. A reporter from the city's leading newspaper shouted a question over the noise. Beatrice completely lost whatever remained of her aristocratic composure. "Turn those cameras off!" she shrieked, waving her arms wildly, her custom crimson gown tangling around her legs. "Security! Confiscate their cameras! This is a private event! She is a liar!" But nobody moved to help her. The mayor, realizing the political toxicity of being photographed next to a woman who had just been publicly accused of embezzling charity funds, stood up so fast he knocked his chair over. He practically sprinted toward the side exit, signaling his aides to follow him. The rest of the major donors followed suit. The mass exodus was instantaneous. Nobody wanted to be in the ballroom when the police inevitably arrived. I didn't run. I walked at the exact same measured, deliberate pace I had used when I entered. I walked out the double doors of the Grand Plaza Hotel, handed the valet my ticket, and waited for Julian's leased BMW. I drove it home myself, leaving my husband standing in the ruins of his mother's vanity project. If you think a public humiliation is the worst thing that can happen to a narcissist, stick around. Because the public humiliation was just the appetizer. The main course was served on Monday morning by the state attorney general. By Sunday afternoon, the video of my speech had gone viral locally. Every news outlet in the state was running the story of the fake foundation. Beatrice Kensington's face was plastered across the Sunday editions under headlines like "Charity Case" or "Charity Fraud." On Monday at 8 a.m. sharp, agents from the Attorney General's Office of Charitable Trusts executed a search warrant on the Kensington Foundation's downtown offices. I didn't have to guess what happened. David, my fiduciary, kept me updated through his high-level legal contacts. The board of directors, terrified of going to federal prison, completely turned on Beatrice. Richard, the sweating chairman, handed the investigators everything: the ledgers, the fake expense reports, and the keys to the foundation's basement storage facility. That was where they found the secret Beatrice had been hiding for 5 years. Beatrice hadn't just been using donor money to pay for first-class flights and luxury SUVs. Every year, the foundation hosted a massive silent auction at the Gala, purportedly to raise funds. High-end donors would donate vintage Rolex watches, Birkin bags, and priceless modern art. Beatrice had been manipulating the auction records. She would falsely report that the most expensive items hadn't met their reserve price and had gone unsold. But they hadn't gone unsold. They had gone into the basement. The investigators opened a climate-controlled storage unit beneath the foundation's offices and found over $2 million worth of unsold auction items. Beatrice had been hoarding them. She was treating the charity's vault like her own personal tax-free shopping mall, slowly moving pieces into her own home whenever she needed a new accessory to impress her country club friends. The moment the Attorney General found the basement vault, it escalated from civil mismanagement to felony grand larceny. All of Beatrice's personal bank accounts were immediately frozen. The foundation's assets were seized. And then, the fallout reached Julian. Julian had spent the weekend frantically blowing up my phone, leaving voicemails that ranged from screaming rage to pathetic begging. I didn't answer a single one. I spent Sunday packing my clothes, my files, and my custom-built computer servers. I moved into a luxury penthouse suite downtown that I leased under my corporate LLC. I left the keys to the starter home on the kitchen counter, right next to the prenuptial agreement his mother had forced me to sign. We met 2 weeks later in a glass-walled conference room at my corporate attorney's office to finalize the divorce. Julian arrived looking like a ghost. He had lost weight. He was wearing a wrinkled suit that looked like it hadn't been dry cleaned in a month. He was accompanied by a terrifyingly expensive divorce attorney named Vance, a man who charged $1,000 an hour and specialized in protecting old money. I sat across from them, wearing a simple beige cashmere sweater, sipping a coffee. My lawyer, a brilliant cutthroat woman named Sarah, sat beside me with a single, remarkably thin file folder. "Let's get straight to it," Vance said, leaning forward aggressively, slapping a thick stack of papers onto the table. "My client is filing for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, heavily exacerbated by your client's malicious targeted campaign to destroy his family's business interests. Due to the extreme financial distress your client has caused, we are seeking significant spousal support. We know about the $40 million, Nora, and since that wealth was technically realized and managed during the marriage, we are claiming it as a marital asset. Julian is entitled to half." Julian looked at me, a desperate, greedy light flickering in his exhausted eyes. He genuinely thought he was about to walk away with $20 million. He thought the Kensington name still carried enough weight to bully me into a settlement. I didn't say a word. I just took a sip of my coffee and looked at Sarah. Sarah smiled. It was a terrifying smile. She didn't open a briefcase. She didn't pull out a countersuit. She simply reached across the table and slid a single stapled document toward Vance. "I'm afraid your claim to marital assets is going to hit a bit of a snag, Vance," Sarah said smoothly. "Are you familiar with the Kensington family's standard prenuptial agreement? The one drafted by Beatrice Kensington's own corporate legal team?" Vance frowned, looking down at the document. "Of course I am. It's an ironclad asset protection vehicle. It ensures that in the event of a dissolution, the incoming spouse has no claim to the Kensington family wealth, trusts, or future inheritances. It protects Julian." "Did you actually read the specific verbiage of the waiver clause, or did you just assume it only worked in one direction?" Sarah asked, tilting her head. Vance's eyes narrowed. He picked up the prenup, flipped to the 4th page, and began to read the highlighted section. I watched his eyes track across the legal jargon. I watched the exact moment his brain processed the catastrophic flaw in Beatrice's arrogance. Beatrice had been so absolutely certain that I was a penniless, low-level freelancer that she hadn't bothered to have the lawyers draft a unilateral waiver. She didn't want to pay the legal fees for a customized document, so she used a standard, boilerplate mutual waiver of assets. The clause didn't just say Nora waived her right to Julian's assets. It stated, in airtight, legally binding language, that both parties fully, irreversibly, and permanently waived any and all claims to the other party's premarital assets, business acquisitions, capital gains, and separate financial portfolios realized before or during the marriage. Beatrice had demanded I sign a document that built an impenetrable titanium wall between our finances. She thought she was locking me out of the Kensington fortune. She had actually locked Julian out of mine. Vance stopped reading. He read the paragraph again, and then he slowly lowered the paper, the color draining from his face. He looked at Julian, not with the confidence of an expensive litigator, but with the profound pity of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Julian," Vance said, his voice completely flat, "did your mother's team draft this?" "Yeah," Julian said, looking confused by his lawyer's sudden shift in tone. Mom made sure it was bulletproof. It protects my trust fund. It's a mutual waiver, Vance explained, rubbing his temples. Julian, you waived your right to alimony. You waived your right to spousal support. You waived your right to any capital gains from her software company. This document is bulletproof, all right? But it's pointed directly at your own head. You have absolutely no legal claim to her $40 million. None. Julian froze. He stared at Vance and then he looked at me. The reality of his situation crashed over him in a violent, suffocating wave. Because of the Attorney General's investigation, the Kensington family assets were frozen. The trust fund Julian had lived on his entire life was completely inaccessible, tied up in federal litigation as the government tried to claw back the embezzled charity funds. Beatrice was facing massive legal fees and potential prison time. Julian had no income. He had no real job experience outside of his father's company, which was currently hemorrhaging clients, and the woman he had treated like a little charity case was sitting across from him with $40 million that he couldn't touch. Nora, please, Julian whispered, his voice cracking. The arrogance was completely gone. The Kensington superiority had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, incompetent boy who suddenly realized he had to pay his own bills. My accounts are frozen. The lawyers are taking everything. I can't even afford the property taxes on the starter home. You have $40 million. You can't just leave me with nothing. I set my coffee cup down. I looked at the man who had stood in a ballroom and let his mother humiliate me. I'm not leaving you with nothing, Julian, I said calmly. I'm leaving you with exactly what you brought to this marriage, an inflated sense of self-worth and your mother's approval. You can keep both. I stood up. Sarah closed her thin file folder. Send us the divorce decree, Vance, Sarah said. My client will sign it today. We won't be paying your legal fees. I walked out of the conference room without looking back. I didn't need to hear him cry. The ledger was balanced. The fallout over the next year was the kind of spectacular collapse that local society magazines feast on. Beatrice Kensington did not go to prison, much to the disappointment of the public. Her expensive lawyers managed to negotiate a plea deal that involved massive financial restitution, 5 years of probation, and a lifetime ban from ever serving on the board of any charitable organization or nonprofit in the United States. She had to liquidate all of her personal assets, her jewelry, her art, and the sprawling Kensington family estate, just to pay back the Attorney General's office and the furious donors she had defrauded. She lives in a rented 2-bedroom condo now. Her country club friends completely abandoned her. In high society, you can be cruel and you can be arrogant, but you can never, ever be poor. Julian tried to keep up appearances for a few months, but without his trust fund, the facade crumbled quickly. He was forced to sell his leased BMW and move out of the starter home. He works as a mid-level sales associate for a commercial supply company now. I occasionally see his name pop up on LinkedIn. He still hasn't updated his profile picture. He's still using a photo from the gala, wearing a tuxedo paid for by a charity that doesn't exist anymore. As for me, I didn't buy a massive mansion. I didn't start wearing flashy designer labels. I still drive a perfectly reliable car, and I still prefer the quiet sanctuary of my home office. But I did put the Vanguard Horizon initiative to good use. I partnered with David, my fiduciary, to restructure the trust. We didn't throw million-dollar galas with caviar and orchestras. Instead, we quietly funded 3 full-ride scholarship programs for teenagers aging out of the state foster care system, the actual at-risk youth Beatrice had spent 5 years using as a marketing prop. I don't put my name on the buildings. I don't give interviews to lifestyle magazines. The work speaks for itself, and the money actually reaches the people who need it. My mother-in-law spent 3 years looking at me and seeing a vulnerable, subservient girl she could use to elevate her own status. She thought that because I was quiet, I was weak. She thought that because I didn't wear my wealth on my sleeve, I had no power. She learned the hard way that true power doesn't need to scream. True power doesn't need a chandelier, a microphone, or an audience. True power is having the patience to sit in the dark, audit the ledgers, and wait for the exact right moment to turn on the lights. I was 31 the evening my mother-in-law introduced me to the mayor as her son's little charity case. I was 31 and a half when I legally dismantled her entire empire with a single piece of paper. That is my story. One fraudulent foundation, one ironclad prenuptial agreement, and a room full of elite socialites who finally learned who was actually writing the checks. If you are currently sitting at a table where people are mistaking your silence for submission, take this as your sign to stop trying to prove your worth to them. Let them underestimate you. Let them dig their own graves. Just make sure you own the shovel. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today on Calm Drama Stories. If you loved watching the Kensington family's arrogance become their ultimate downfall, drop a comment below and let me know your favorite part of the gala. Please hit the like button, share this with someone who needs a reminder that the quiet ones always keep the receipts, and make sure you are subscribed so you never miss a story. I will see you in the next one.